I always thought my younger sister Ella and I were close. Growing up, we shared everything. Secrets whispered late at night, clothes borrowed without asking, dreams about our future lives. Sure, we were different. I was the quiet one, the girl who preferred books to parties, someone who found peace in solitude rather than seeking the spotlight. Ella was my opposite in almost every way. She thrived on attention, loved being the center of every room she entered, and had a magnetic personality that drew people to her like moths to a flame. But I never saw those differences as a problem. I thought they made us complement each other perfectly. I was so incredibly, painfully wrong. When I met Mark 3 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party, I felt something shift in my world. He wasn't like the other guys I'd dated. He actually listened when I talked about my work as a graphic designer. He remembered small details I mentioned in passing. He never made me feel like I needed to be louder or more outgoing to deserve his attention. Mark loved me exactly as I was, and that feeling was completely foreign to me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. Our relationship grew slowly and naturally. Mark was patient with my introverted nature, never pushing me into social situations that made me uncomfortable. He'd hold my hand at family gatherings when I felt overwhelmed, creating a quiet bubble of safety just for the two of us. He supported my career ambitions and celebrated every small victory like it was a major achievement. When he proposed on a quiet beach at sunset, with no crowd or fanfare, just the two of us and the sound of waves, I knew he understood me completely. It was perfect. He was perfect for me. My family absolutely adored Mark from the moment they met him. My parents would light up whenever he came over for dinner. My dad, who is usually reserved with my boyfriends, would actually seek Mark out for conversations about sports and politics. My mom treated him like the son she never had, constantly making his favorite foods and asking his opinion on everything from paint colors to vacation destinations. But Ella seemed especially taken with him. She'd always make a point to sit next to Mark at family dinners, laughing at all his jokes, asking him questions about his work as a software engineer, complimenting his clothes and his car. I thought it was sweet that my sister and my fiancé got along so well. I actually felt grateful that the two most important people in my life, besides my parents, genuinely liked each other. After Mark proposed, the wedding planning consumed most of my free time. I was trying to balance my full-time job with choosing venues, tasting cakes, and managing the 1,000 tiny decisions that go into planning a wedding. Ella offered to help with various tasks, and I was touched by her enthusiasm. She helped me research photographers, went dress shopping with me and Mom, and seemed genuinely excited about being my maid of honor. Every time I felt stressed or overwhelmed, she'd reassure me that everything would be perfect, that I deserved this happiness, that Mark was lucky to have me. I believed every word. About a month ago, Ella called me on a Tuesday evening. I was working late, finishing up a logo design for a difficult client when her name flashed on my phone screen. She sounded cheerful and a bit secretive, the way she used to sound when we were kids, and she was planning a surprise. She told me she wanted to get me the perfect wedding gift, something really meaningful that would make me cry happy tears. She said she had some ideas, but wanted Mark's input to make sure she got it right. Would it be okay if she met him for coffee to discuss it? She didn't want to bother me since I was so busy with work and wedding planning. The request seemed completely reasonable and incredibly thoughtful. I was actually touched that she wanted to put so much effort into finding the perfect gift. I told her that was sweet of her and gave her Mark's number. I even texted Mark afterward to let him know Ella would be reaching out, that she wanted to surprise me with something special. He responded with a simple thumbs up emoji. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. They met that Thursday afternoon at a coffee shop downtown, a trendy place called The Daily Grind that Ella loved. Mark had taken a late lunch break from work to meet her. He'd told me that morning he'd probably be home around 6, that he'd grab takeout on the way, so I wouldn't have to cook after my long day. When 6 o'clock came and went with no Mark, I started to worry. By 7, I was calling his phone repeatedly. He finally walked through the door at 7:30, and the moment I saw his face, I knew something was catastrophically wrong. Mark's expression was completely blank, like he'd shut down emotionally. His eyes, usually so warm and full of life when he looked at me, seemed distant and cold. He barely acknowledged my greeting, just walked past me to the bedroom and sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the wall. I followed him, my heart pounding, my mind racing through possibilities. Had someone died? Did he lose his job? Was he having second thoughts about the wedding? The silence stretched between us like a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. I sat down next to him and placed my hand on his back. He flinched slightly at my touch, which felt like a knife to my heart. Mark never pulled away from me. Never. I asked him what happened, what was wrong, why he seemed so upset. He just shook his head and said he needed time to think. Time to think about what? He wouldn't answer. I tried everything I could think of to get him to talk to me. I offered to make him dinner, to give him space, days to just sit with him in silence. Nothing worked. He eventually got up, said he was going to sleep in the guest room, and left me sitting there completely bewildered and terrified. That night was one of the longest of my life. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. I couldn't understand what had changed so drastically in the span of a few hours. That morning, Mark had kissed me goodbye and told me he loved me. Now, he couldn't even look at me. I wanted to storm into the guest room and demand answers, but something told me that would only push him further away. So I waited, barely sleeping, listening to every sound in the house, hoping he'd come back to our room and tell me this was all some terrible misunderstanding. The next morning, Mark looked like he hadn't slept either. His eyes were red and puffy, his hair disheveled. He made coffee in silence while I watched from the kitchen doorway, afraid to speak, afraid to break whatever fragile peace existed between us. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I told him I loved him, that whatever was wrong, we could fix it together, that he was scaring me with his silence. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Pain. Deep, terrible pain mixed with confusion. He asked me to sit down. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been crying. We sat at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared countless meals and conversations, where we'd planned our future together, and he told me about his meeting with Ella. As he spoke, I felt my entire world tilting on its axis, nothing making sense anymore. Ella hadn't wanted to discuss a wedding gift at all. That had been a lie, a manipulation to get Mark alone. From the moment he sat down at that coffee shop, she'd launched into what Mark described as a calculated attack on my character. She told him I'd been cheating on him for months. She said she'd struggled with whether to tell him, that it had torn her apart keeping this secret, but she couldn't let her sister marry a good man under false pretenses. She claimed she loved me, but loved the truth more. Mark's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and showed me the evidence Ella had presented to him. There were screenshots of text messages that appeared to be from my phone number, flirty, and inappropriate conversations with someone named Jake. There were photos that looked like me at a restaurant with a man, sitting close, laughing, his hand on my arm. There were supposed receipts from hotels and gifts I'd allegedly purchased for this other man. Everything was designed to paint a picture of a woman living a double life. A woman who was making a fool of her faithful fiancé. I felt sick looking at those images. The screenshots were completely fabricated. I never sent those messages. I didn't even know anyone named Jake. The photos were expertly edited. My face photoshopped onto someone else's body, or images manipulated to look like something they weren't. The receipts were completely fake, but I could see how convincing they looked, how much effort Ella had put into creating this elaborate lie. My own sister had spent time, probably weeks, carefully constructing false evidence to destroy my relationship. Mark told me that Ella had cried during their meeting. She played the role of the heartbroken sister perfectly, torn between loyalty to family and doing the right thing. She told him I'd always been selfish, that I'd always wanted what I couldn't have, that I was incapable of being faithful to anyone. She said she'd seen me with this Jake person multiple times, that she confronted me about it, and I'd laughed it off, told her to mind her own business. She painted herself as the hero of the story, the brave sister willing to risk her relationship with me to save Mark from making the biggest mistake of his life. But here's the thing about Mark that made me fall in love with him in the first place. He's thoughtful and deliberate. He doesn't make rash decisions based on emotion. Even though Ella's evidence looked convincing, even though she'd clearly put enormous effort into this deception, Mark knew me. He knew my character, my values, my heart. He told Ella he needed to think about what she'd shown him, but he didn't believe I was capable of the betrayal she described. He defended me to my own sister, told her there had to be another explanation, that the woman he knew would never do something like this. Ella had apparently gotten angry when Mark didn't immediately break up with me. She'd expected him to be devastated and grateful for her revelation. Instead, he questioned her motives and her evidence. She'd actually raised her voice in the coffee shop, telling him he was being naive, that he was blinded by love, that he'd regret not listening to her. Other customers had stared. Mark had gotten up and left, his mind reeling, trying to process what had just happened. As Mark finished telling me everything, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that he'd believed in me, that our relationship was strong enough to withstand Ella's lies. Gratitude that I'd chosen a partner who truly knew and trusted me. But mostly, I felt a deep, aching betrayal that cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. This wasn't a stranger trying to hurt me. This was my sister. My little sister who I'd protected and loved and supported my entire life. The same sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd cried on my shoulder through her first heartbreak, who I'd helped with homework and college applications and every major life decision. I sat there at our kitchen table, tears streaming down my face, trying to understand why. Why would Ella do this? What had I done to make her hate me so much? Mark held my hand across the table, and I could see his own confusion and hurt reflected in his eyes. He'd thought of Ella as a future sister-in-law, someone who'd be part of our family forever. Now she was revealed as someone capable of shocking cruelty and deception. I knew I had to confront her. I needed to hear from her own mouth why she'd done this terrible thing. Part of me still hoped there was some explanation, some misunderstanding that would make sense of everything. Maybe someone had manipulated her, fed her false information about me. Maybe she was having some kind of mental health crisis. I was grasping at straws, desperate for any explanation that didn't involve my sister deliberately trying to destroy my happiness. I called Ella that afternoon. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. She asked how I was doing, if I'd made any progress on the wedding seating chart we'd been working on. She sounded so normal, so much like the sister I'd always known, that for a moment I questioned whether Mark had somehow misunderstood what happened. But then I remembered the fabricated evidence, the calculated lies, and my resolve hardened. I told her I knew about her meeting with Mark. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. The cheerful facade had dropped, replaced by something colder. She asked what Mark had told me. I said he'd told me everything about her accusations, about the fake evidence, about her attempt to convince him I was cheating. Another pause, longer this time. Then she said we needed to talk in person. We agreed to meet at a park near our parents' house, a place where we'd played as children. I arrived first and sat on a bench overlooking the playground, watching kids on the swings, their laughter echoing across the open space. It felt surreal to be in this place of innocent childhood memories while preparing to confront my sister about her betrayal. Ella showed up 15 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. She sat down on the opposite end of the bench, maintaining physical distance between us. I asked her directly why she'd done it, why she tried to destroy my relationship with Mark, why she created elaborate lies and fake evidence, why she betrayed me in such a fundamental way. I expected denial or maybe an emotional breakdown. What I got instead was something much worse. Ella removed her sunglasses and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. It was cold and calculating, completely void of the warmth I associated with my sister. She told me she'd done it because she was tired of watching me get everything I wanted, tired of being the sister who was always second best, always in my shadow. She said that our whole lives, I'd been the one everyone praised, the smart one, the talented one, the one who made good decisions. She was just the pretty one, the fun one, the one people enjoyed at parties but didn't take seriously. When I'd brought Mark home and everyone had fallen in love with him, had celebrated our engagement like it was the event of the century, something inside her had snapped. She admitted she developed feelings for Mark herself. She thought he was exactly the kind of man she'd always wanted, stable and successful and genuinely kind. But of course, he'd chosen me. Everyone always chose me, she said bitterly. So she decided that if she couldn't have him, I shouldn't either. She'd spent weeks creating the fake evidence, learning photo editing software, setting up fake text conversations. She'd actually seemed proud of her efforts, like they demonstrated impressive dedication rather than disturbing obsession. I sat there listening to her confession, feeling like I was talking to a stranger. This wasn't the sister I'd grown up with, or maybe it was, and I'd just never seen this side of her before. I asked her if she felt any remorse at all, any guilt about what she tried to do. She shrugged and said she felt bad that it hadn't worked, that Mark had been too smart to fall for it. She actually seemed more disappointed about the failure of her plan than the morality of her actions. I told her she needed help, that her jealousy and resentment had twisted into something dangerous and unhealthy. She laughed at that, a harsh sound that made me flinch. She said I was so predictable, always trying to fix everyone, always playing the role of the perfect older sister. She stood up to leave, and I asked her if our entire relationship had been a lie. Had she always hated me? She looked at me for a long moment before answering. She said she didn't hate me, she just hated what I represented. Then she walked away, leaving me sitting alone on that bench, grieving for the sister I thought I'd had. I knew I had to tell our parents what had happened. They deserved to know the truth about what Ella had done. I drove to their house that evening, my stomach churning with anxiety. How do you tell your parents that one of their daughters had tried to sabotage the other's life? How do you break their hearts with the truth about their youngest child? Mom and Dad were in the living room when I arrived, watching their usual evening news program. They looked so happy to see me, so normal and unaware of the bomb I was about to drop. I asked them to turn off the TV, told them I needed to talk to them about something serious. The concern on their faces faces was immediate. Dad muted the television, and they both turned to face me, giving me their full attention. I told them everything. About Ella's meeting with Mark, about the fabricated evidence, about her confession in the park. I showed them the fake screenshots and photos on my phone. Let them see the extent of her deception. As I spoke, I watched my parents' expressions change from confusion to disbelief to horror. Mom started crying halfway through my explanation. Dad's face turned red, then pale, cycling through emotions too quickly to track. When I finished, there was a long silence. Mom kept saying no over and over, like she could deny the reality of what I told them. Dad just sat there, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. Finally, he asked if I was absolutely certain about everything. Could there be any misunderstanding? I told him I wished there was, but Ella had admitted everything to me directly. She hadn't even tried to deny it or make excuses. Dad called Ella immediately, putting the phone on speaker. When she answered, he asked her to come to the house right away, that we needed to have a family meeting. Ella tried to make excuses about being busy, but Dad's tone left no room for argument. She arrived 20 minutes later, and the moment she walked into the living room and saw all of us sitting there, she knew what was happening. Mom asked her if what I'd said was true. Had she really tried to convince Mark I was cheating? Had she really created fake evidence to destroy my relationship? Ella's defiant attitude from the park had disappeared. Faced with our parents' disappointment and anger, she seemed to shrink into herself. She nodded slowly, confirming everything. Dad asked her why. It was a simple question, but his voice cracked on that single word. Ella tried to explain about feeling overshadowed, about her jealousy and resentment, about developing feelings for Mark. But her explanations sounded hollow and inadequate in the face of what she'd done. Mom asked her if she understood how serious this was, that she tried to ruin her own sister's life out of jealousy. Ella said she knew it was wrong, but she couldn't take it back now. My parents made a decision that night that I never expected. Dad told Ella that what she'd done was unforgivable, that she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He said they loved her, but they couldn't condone her actions or pretend they hadn't happened. They needed time and space to process everything, and until Ella got professional help and showed genuine remorse and change, they couldn't have a relationship with her. Essentially, they were cutting ties with their youngest daughter. Ella's face went white. She started to argue, to plead, saying they couldn't be serious. But Dad was firm. He told her to leave and not contact any of us until she'd done some serious work on herself. Mom was sobbing, but she didn't contradict Dad's decision. Ella looked at me then, and I saw a real fear in her eyes for the first time. She'd expected me to intercede, to talk our parents down from such a drastic response. But I stayed silent. What she'd done had consequences, and I wasn't going to protect her from them anymore. After Ella left, the three of us sat together in that living room for hours. Mom and Dad apologized to me repeatedly, as if they were somehow responsible for Ella's choices. I assured them they weren't, that Ella was an adult who'd made her own decisions. But I could see the guilt and confusion in their eyes. They were questioning everything, wondering where they'd gone wrong, how they'd missed the signs of Ella's resentment and instability. The weeks that followed were strange and painful. Planning a wedding while dealing with family trauma proved more difficult than I'd imagined. There were constant reminders of Ella's absence. The bridesmaid dress she'd already picked out hung in my closet. Her name was still on the seating chart as maid of honor. I had to call relatives and explain, in vague terms, that Ella would no longer be in the wedding party due to personal issues. The gossip and speculation were exhausting. Mark was incredibly supportive through everything. He never said, "I told you so," or expressed anger toward Ella, even though he had every right to. He focused on taking care of me, on making sure I was okay emotionally. He suggested we postpone the wedding if I needed more time, but I refused. I wasn't going to let Ella's actions delay our happiness any longer than they already had. Ella tried to contact me several times. Text messages that started apologetic and became increasingly desperate and angry when I didn't respond. Voicemails where she alternated between begging for forgiveness and blaming me for turning our parents against her. I blocked her number eventually. I needed space to heal, to process the betrayal and loss of the sister I thought I knew. My parents struggled with their decision to cut ties with Ella. Mom would sometimes cry at random moments, mourning the loss of her daughter, even though Ella was still alive. Dad threw himself into helping with wedding preparations, channeling his pain into action. They both made it clear they supported their choice, but that didn't make it any less agonizing. Cutting off your own child, even an adult child who'd done something terrible, goes against every parental instinct. About 2 weeks before the wedding, I received a letter from Ella. It had been delivered to my parents' house, and Mom had called to ask if I wanted her to throw it away or bring it to me. I told her to bring it. Part of me needed to know what Ella had to say, even though I wasn't ready for direct contact. The letter was long, pages and pages of Ella's handwriting. She apologized for what she'd done, acknowledged how wrong her actions had been. She explained that she'd started seeing a therapist, that she was working on understanding her jealousy and resentment. She talked about how she'd always felt like she was competing with me, even though I'd never treated our relationship as a competition. She admitted that her feelings for Mark had been more about wanting what I had than actually loving him as a person. She said she understood if I never forgave her, but she wanted me to know she was genuinely sorry and trying to change. Reading that letter, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to believe she was sincere, that she was truly working on herself. The sister I'd loved was still in there somewhere, buried under years of hidden resentment and jealousy. But another part of me, the part that had been deeply wounded by her betrayal, couldn't trust her words. Apologies were easy. Real change was hard. And even if she did change, even if she became a better person, that didn't erase what she'd done or automatically restore our relationship. I wrote back to her a much shorter letter. I told her I appreciated her apology and was glad she was getting help. I said I needed more time before I could consider rebuilding any kind of relationship with her, if that was even possible. I wished her well in her therapy and her journey of self-improvement. But I made it clear that forgiveness wasn't something I could offer right now, maybe not ever. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal completely. Mark and I got married on a beautiful Saturday in October. The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of, intimate and meaningful, surrounded by people who genuinely loved and supported us. There was an Ella-shaped absence in the room, a missing piece that everyone felt but nobody mentioned. Mom cried more than usual, and I knew she was grieving her youngest daughter even while celebrating her oldest. But despite that shadow, the day was filled with joy and love and hope for the future. During our first dance, Mark whispered in my ear that he was proud of me, proud of how I'd handled everything with grace and strength. He told me he'd never been more certain about marrying me, that Ella's attempt to destroy us had only proven how solid our foundation was. I held him close and felt grateful, not just for him, but for the clarity this whole terrible situation had brought. I knew exactly who I could trust, who truly had my best interests at heart, who would stand by me even when things got difficult. Now, several months later, life has settled into a new normal. Mark and I are happy, building our life together, making plans for the future. My parents are slowly healing, though they still carry the pain of their decision to cut ties with Ella. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that Ella is still in therapy, that she's made some positive changes in her life. Part of me is glad to hear that. Despite everything, she's still my sister, and I don't wish her harm. But I'm not ready to let her back into my life. Maybe someday, after more time and healing, we can have some kind of relationship again. Maybe not. I've learned that family doesn't automatically deserve your trust and loyalty just because you share DNA. Real family is built on mutual respect, support, and genuine love. It's about people who celebrate your happiness rather than trying to destroy it out of jealousy. Sometimes I think about what motivated Ella to do what she did. Was it really just jealousy? Was there something deeper, some pain or insecurity I'd missed? Could I have done something differently to prevent this? But then I remember that Ella's choices were her own. I can't take responsibility for her actions or her feelings. All I can do is move forward, protect my own peace and happiness, and surround myself with people who truly want the best for me. The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about trust, boundaries, and the complexity of family relationships. It showed me the importance of choosing a partner who knows you deeply enough to see through lies and manipulation. It reminded me that sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you the most profoundly, but that pain doesn't have to define your future. If you enjoyed this story, like and subscribe for more real-life experiences and lessons learned the hard way.